We're good. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move on and make sure I bring up my next speaker, who's Scott Spector. Scott, are you here? You might be coming in under Stacy Perez's. It looks like you're Dr. Stacy Perez, but you're really not.
I have no idea why it's doing that, Leilani. How are you?
I'm good. It's really good to see you again.
It's
So
good to
much
see
to
you.
talk to you. So much to talk to you about because, California's been kind of a rough ride.
That would be an understatement. There we go. Somebody just changed it for me. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. So just to introduce you to everybody that's on the line, and also just so you know, we're recording this, so when we send it out nationally, that's normally when we get like 6,000 people to view it. You're coordinator of innovation and academic events from Santa Barbara County Education Office. Can we start out first with sort of your purview and what you're having to do?
So there's a couple of different things for me, Leilani. Number one, I'm the science, STEM, and STEAM coordinator here at the county office, which kind of goes hand in hand with coordinator of innovation. STEM and STEAM are both innovative practices on that one. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve on that one. The second thing I also do is I'm in charge of student events here. So we've got a lot of different student events that we run here. Battle of the Books, spelling bee for the county-wide, and then send kids up to the state championship. Author go round, whole bunch of different things that we're running, both virtual and face-to-face in person. We've done kind of a combination of a hybrid with a bunch of different events, including one of them our Battle of the Books in terms of trying to do it now. And a lot of the things that we've learned from the pandemic, we've also used to help be more inclusive of more kids throughout the county as well. Before, it used to be a face-to-face with all of our events, and those kids that could come were able, those that weren't because it was distance prohibitive, or maybe there were competitions to narrow down the numbers. So it's really been a lot more inclusive since we've done, whether it be a virtual model or a hybrid model, of including a lot more kids in some of the innovative practices that we're doing throughout the county.
Okay, good. Now, are you also experiencing, if you bring kids in, or you have to distance them or put them under tents in some instances?
We'll let you know because we've got our first couple of events coming up in October for this year. We haven't done anything in person from the student standpoint. Right now, there's a lot of schools that are very tentative to bring kids on campus, tentative to have us come on campus and do professional developments with teachers. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Some of them, numbers are really down from what it's been in the last 7 years since I've been here at the county office. So just very tentative for people to meet in general in person, very hesitant, parents hesitant to put kids in that situation, not knowing who they're going to be in there with, whether these kids are vaccinated, whether the adults in the room are vaccinated. So I don't know. In about 2 or 3 weeks, when we have our first face-to-face event towards the end of October, I could let you know on that one. If it's any indication, numbers are just really low for anything where anybody throughout our county, and in talking to a lot of the county education offices, it's the same everywhere. Numbers are really low when it has to do with anything in person. The virtual events are being far more successful just in terms of attendance for us.
Yeah, that's going to be true for California. It has been true in other places, but Doug and I are going next week to Dallas and Atlanta. Dallas, they don't even require masks.
Yep.
They're just like, no, fill up the room. It's awesome. We're like, okay. It's different everywhere. It's a very wild time. So what has happened then? Because you're talking, you're over the STEM and STEAM programs, but you're also probably talking to a lot of schools. What's really happening with this mutation of time and space, the model?
We've got 20 districts in our county alone, and there are 20 districts that are kind of all over the place with it. There's no one set pattern. Nobody's doing one thing and everybody's following. I think the one thing with the pandemic is it gave people a lot of opportunity, and some of them use that opportunity to take the chance to say, okay, let's try something we've been wanting to do, but maybe we're afraid to do because we were afraid how parents were going to react, how kids were going to react. We were afraid maybe it was going to lower test scores. But I think now you're seeing a lot of schools and districts, and especially probably some of those charter schools that are willing to try something that's a little bit more different, a little bit out of the ordinary, without so much of the fear of the repercussions. Because from a state standpoint, in the state of California,
Mhm.
you know, you have nothing to lose right now, and nothing to lose in terms of testing and funding from the government and things like that. So it gives you the opportunity. You've got an open window. You've had it for the last couple of years. You're probably going to have it for another year, maybe if they're lucky, maybe 2 years, because most of the data is not going to be able to be assessed in any real way, shape, or form on that. So some of them have used this time to do the same old, same old. Some of them are using the time really to be innovative, to be creative, and to try some things without any fear of repercussions from anybody, whether it be parents, whether it be district people, or whether it be the state from the standpoint of the CDE taking a look at what they're doing.
Yeah, no, does that also mean that maybe some of the testing was done away with? Is that sort of been moratoriumized for a little while?
In California, not officially. What they did do is they gave them the option. They could have run with the state tests that they've done and all that stuff, or they gave them the option of going ahead and coming up. They could have run their own district assessment. They could have run any multiple, and some of them did their own. Some did not do the state assessments and things like that. And that was, they were given the opportunity for that. Most of that is going to change. Most of them are going to go back to the standard testing. You've got a lot of different changes coming about here in California. You had the new NGSS and you had the science test, and the CAS test was changed. So you've got kind of a new pilot going out this year with it reworked and a new blueprint. You've got new blueprints for the English language arts and the math testing as well. So I think some of them are seeing it as an opportunity. Let's throw the test out there. Let's see how the kids do, and then maybe that informs us in terms of how we move forward with our directed teaching in that fashion. And you know, hopefully some of them take a little bit different look or a little bit different angle at that, and maybe come in with a different approach than they have done in the past with the testing.
Yeah, so yeah, so we're still sort of in a phase with your area. We're up here in Northern California, and some of the schools have gone back physical and then withdrawn again. There's big achievement loss reported from other states. So that's why I asked you about the testing. What is your take on achievement?
So it's really a different perspective. And I think I've seen and heard from a lot of people in a lot of different counties here in California. I've heard from a lot of different people throughout the United States, and the way they approve it, the way they approach it. And I think most of them, it's pretty consistent. They're trying to get away from the terms of accelerated learning, achievement loss, and all that. They're trying to move in a whole bunch of different directions other than those, because it's got such a negative connotation on it. I think a lot of them now are going with the accelerated learning. And I think one of the things that I'm seeing, probably the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now, is trying to work with districts and not get them to decelerate the learning for kids. So you've got a third grade teacher I just spoke with a couple of days ago, and it's like, hey, my kids have not even gotten to where they need to from the second grade. How am I supposed to start with science with them in the third grade with NGSS performance expectations when they have barely gotten through first grade, haven't gotten through the second grade, because they've really had science here in California at the elementary level is not always taught on a consistent basis as is. And then you throw in the COVID situation in the last couple of years, and you still have, above and beyond all this, you still have a lot of administrators, district people telling a lot of the elementary teachers to focus on math and English language arts, because those are the two that are going to assess the sciences and on the state dashboard yet. So there's so many different factors playing into that. But I think the biggest one for every teacher at any grade level in any content area is don't decelerate the teaching for your students because of the fear of learning loss. I think what we've been trying to tell teachers is, okay, you're a third grade elementary teacher, come in there and address the third grade performance expectations for science. And I'm just using science because those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. And then if you see through your informal assessments, formative assessments, whatever you want to call them. Some people are calling them informative assessments because we're really informing them on what's going on. Then if you see your kids need that first or second grade performance expectation touched upon, then you need to go back and do it. But I think the fear is that you're going to see people going all the way back to the first grade for a third grade teacher. Then by the time they leave the third grade, they're still going to be short when they enter the fourth grade. And it's just a cycle that's not going to end. So the best advice I think I could give in any content area is start with the standards that you're supposed to go over for your grade level. And then if you see that the kids need something, you can figure out ways to differentiate that instruction to go back and get what they need. But don't water the whole thing down by going all the way back to those first grade standards if you're a third grade teacher, because the kids are not going to catch up if we do that.
Yeah, maybe you just have to make a little remedial assignment for one or two kids, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of teachers that are doing, I think the one thing that the COVID taught us again too is the importance or the strength of asynchronous work in the classroom. And I think what you're seeing is a lot of teachers covering what they need to in the synchronous work, but making asynchronous available to kids so they can go back in their own time. They can go back with parents, maybe tutors, things like that, and cover some of that work to try and get themselves caught up to where they need to be in order to move forward.
Yeah, so this brings us right on back full circle to, because I want to talk about other stuff with you too, but this is the model shift, right? What you're saying is that people are trying to they need to right now because of the way it's structured anyway, keep the group together, right? Keep moving forward, but then play all this catch up, which begs the question of, since we're in a whole group model, and we keep having to disaggregate it for the laggers or the ones that are ahead, is it the right model? So how you see, because it's a wrong model, right? If the model itself can't stay together and it keeps mutating in a million different ways, because then, people go crazy and it's hard on them. What are your thoughts? Are people having some of these conversations? I mean, you talk to all these districts and all these teachers. Are people starting to question the norm at all?
I think to answer your first question, is it the wrong model? I think yes to that answer, because all you have to do is look at the data statistics over the last 25, 30 years in education. And with everybody so far below standard in terms of where they need to be with the majority of their kids. And it doesn't matter whether it's English language learners, whether it's, your GATE kids, whether it's kids that need so-called quote unquote remediation or your slower learners. It doesn't really matter. We're not doing the service to those kids that we need to be doing. And for me personally, again, this is just me personally, I think all of this with the pandemic has been an opportunity for people to try different things and see if there's some other type of a model that we can come up with and utilize. And like I said, in terms of districts and what they're doing, they are willing to admit things are not working and have not been working. Now, getting them to admit that and then getting them also to go out on the ledge and say, let's try something different. I'm still seeing, and this is just myself with my personal perspective, I'm still seeing districts and people very hesitant to do that. You've got the majority of the districts prior to the pandemic, they would all come to us and say, oh my gosh, where do we get money? We want to do this, we want to do that. Now they've got the ESSER money and it's more money than they know what to do with. And the biggest fear for most of these districts is coming to us saying, how do we spend it all by November of next year? So they've got the money, but I still don't see a lot of them being creative or doing things that differently than they were doing before. They may have hired a new position here, a new position there to deal with online learning, remote learning, and whatever they're calling it in those districts. But I still don't see a lot being done differently in terms of their approach. I don't see a lot of them creating some kind of a different model to say, okay, we've got a year, let's try this out and see if it works. Let's try this out maybe with our remote learners, a little something different than in the classroom. Maybe some kind of a hybrid for some of them. We saw a lot of that with science during the pandemic, where you had a lot of hybrids where they were doing a lot of it remote. And then some of them, when they first came back, were bringing them in the class just for science to do labs at the high school level and things like that. So I don't know if I could say there's one consistent thing that they're doing, at least throughout our county. And we have a lot of communications throughout the counties in California on that. But I think there's still a lot of the same old, and I would like to see that stop, because I don't think we were getting the results that everybody wanted for the last 15 or 20 years. And I don't think it's going to change even with all of this. And I'd like to see them trying something a little bit different and keeping the students in mind in terms of what might be best for them and how they learn. And more importantly than how they learn is how they can put a practical application to that learning. And I think that's one of the things I like about science is when they came up with the new science performance expectations, it was kind of getting away from, all right, for the last 30 or 40 years, everybody in science has memorized, they've read about science. Now they're actually getting to the learning of science. And I was just reading with a group this morning. And the nice thing is, the state testing for science, there's a whole section that's dedicated to the kids putting into their own words what they did, what they learned, what they experienced, as to how it relates to a performance expectation. And I'd like to see more of that in the other content areas. And I'd like to see more teachers focusing on that as well, instead of, well, you did this, you got it wrong, you did this, you got it right, here's your points for getting it right, no points for getting it wrong. And I'm still a firm believer in any content area. Sometimes the kids can learn as much, if not more, from doing something wrong the first time around, if they can truly get the understanding of, okay, here's what I needed to do, here's how I correct it, and this is why I got the wrong answer to that.
Yeah, in science, this is the tricky part, because we had a lot of people say during the pandemic, which is now sort of a rocky continuing thing, saying, oh, science is really going to suffer. It doesn't have to. We had one teacher say, well, they had kids doing laundry experiments at home, right? Like which works better on your laundry, the borax, if you add borax, what happens? And what is the chemical structure of borax? Why would that work that way? And then there's apps. I remember this app guy come running up to me at some conference I was at years before the pandemic started. And he was trying to pitch me to talk about on Learning Council News, this app that basically was for city kids or slightly rural kids that allows you to track bats, native bat populations that come out at night, and use your phone to do, bat tracking and other kinds of things. And it was interesting. Because it's a total project you could do from anywhere. Any kid anywhere could do this. And there's all these things that can be done, but you have to have a creative mindset, like you were saying. You have to get outside your mental construct. And I feel like the places that haven't really done that, it's a leadership issue. Leadership is invested. And I don't want you to say anything to incriminate yourself, Scott, but I feel like.
Oh, it's too late for that. I do that every other day, so it's not a big deal.
Okay. I feel like there's a lot of leadership who are little mini empire builders. They've come in to a leadership position and they have all these armies of people below them. And their mental construct is, I'm running these people and these buildings. That's their first thing that they construct their own persona over. And so the structure that they're running is who they are. It's like how if you have a favorite car, it's like you are your car. Like I am my car when I drive my car. Like I am this way this is done. So the thinking outside the box and prioritizing personalized student learning and personalized achievement, we talk about it. But I'm betting, and again, I don't want you to incriminate yourself, I'm betting the majority of leadership is invested in the bureaucracy.
Yeah, and you're right. I would agree with you on that one. And to be real honest with you, having served in many of those positions as a site administrator, as a district administrator up at the state and now at the county level, sometimes it really forces you into that position. You don't have a whole lot of choice in what's going on around you, or you're going against the system if you want to do it some other ways. There's just so much other stuff out there on the table for both site administrators and district administrators to have to comply with. And the compliance is the first and foremost issue, because if you don't comply, you don't get the funding from the state or wherever it's coming from. So I think a lot of that is the whole system needs to be reworked and changed on that. I think another thing, Leilani, to add to what you were talking about, I think one of the positives coming out from an education standpoint with the pandemic is a lot of people, not just in science, but in a lot of their content areas, because they were forced to, started really going with, in our case, it was place-based science, but a lot of place-based education, which is really what the kids enjoy because that's education, which is what's going on in their community. So we had a lot of teachers having their kids take science outside. We had a lot of English teachers having their kids go outside and write about what they were seeing out there, and teachers having kids go out and count the different number of bugs and how many moths and how many beetles do you see, and they got 7 moths and 5 beetles. What's that a total number of bugs? And if you took away a certain number of beetles, we had a lot of math teachers going outside and having kids walk outside, and if they had access to a camera, take pictures of different angles when they were talking about angles in math and things like that. So I think it's kind of, it is what you make of it. And there were some that just kind of cried and complained about the pandemic and, hey, I can't do what I want. I can't do science. I can't do that. There were other teachers that said, hey, there's plenty of chemistry that goes on in the kitchen. There's plenty of chemistry that goes on in the garden. I'm going to plant plants and we're going to measure them and see how long and all that kind of stuff. And some of them did that with their kids and some did not. And even though the majority of kids somewhere along the line came up short probably on their learnings, whether it be the amount or where they needed to get to, there were others that probably had just as good an experience, if not a greater experience. And that was made possible by some of the creative teachers that they're out there and administrators that helped encourage teachers or gave teachers the resources. There were a lot of schools, Leilani, that I know because I saw them picking up lunches that were being served to the kids, and with that lunch came a science bag, or with that lunch came something for English language arts, or some manipulatives for math and things like that. And so instead of sitting around and saying, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, my teachers aren't able to do this, there were others that were sitting out there figuring out and meeting with teachers and parents and kids and saying, how can we do this? The kids need to get this. How do we get it to them? And parents picked up the ball and ran with it, and so did some of the teachers. So you know, a lot of it, while it was a very difficult time, and I know because my wife's an 8th grade science teacher, so I saw it firsthand what she was going through in terms of trying to teach from home, then a hybrid and going through all that kind of stuff. But some of them made the best of it and tried to do what was best for the kids, and others did not. And I think you're going to see that in the next couple of years in terms of where these kids are along the continuum and where they really need to be.
Interesting. So the innovation is occurring at the classroom level mostly through desperation.
Yeah, if nothing else. And a lot of it is teachers wanting to do things for the last few years, and now they finally saw the opportunity where, hey, I can take a chance and I don't have to worry about what the results are because it's still going to be better as long as the kids are doing math, doing science, doing social studies. You know, a lot of teachers are pretty creative in terms of the physical education they were trying to get done with kids in the classroom from a remote perspective as well.
Yeah, physical ed over the internet. That's really awesome. I can only imagine. Well, it's been a moment also, you know, I want to go back to that model conversation where if they're not going to really have that thought, I got to rejigger my model, they're losing kids. Because parents are like, you know, there's a better option over here. They do it totally differently, flexible time schedule and all that other stuff. Have you seen loss? Different districts seen loss of students?
Oh yeah, we've seen a ton of that throughout the districts, and you know, some districts lost kids in the classroom setting, but gained them in the virtual setting, and there were some where their parents said, you know, I think it's a big myth out there, Leilani, to say every kid suffered during the pandemic because the numbers are showing that's completely false. There are some kids, yes, that did struggle, that there was some loss, and it did show up in assessments and things like that. But I tell you what, there's a lot of kids that seem to do a lot better with the remote learning than they were doing in the classroom for whatever reason. You can come up with 1,000 different reasons, but there were some kids that were just seemed to be better suited, and nobody knew it until they were thrown into that situation. And all of a sudden parents and teachers are saying, hey, this is better for my kid. My kid's actually performing. They don't have to take 5 hours to do something they can do in 45 minutes, and then they can get onto something they may really want to do on that one. So I think you're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing a lot of people admit to that. We saw a lot of school populations, you know, go down 300, 400, or 500 because there's options, and parents are finally saying, hey, if my kid did better in this situation, I'm going to put him in a school that puts him in that situation so he can excel and perform, or she can excel and perform better, and things like that. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see in the next couple of years where all this stuff ends up, and where remote learning and where the schools that are hybrid schools and where they end up, and see what the total populations of those schools are, I think you're going to see a big decrease in brick and mortar school population. And I think parents, safety is an issue in a lot of cases, and parents not comfortable with it, and just figuring, if you get the right teacher. I saw some awesome, we did a lesson study in our county, and I happened to have a first grade teacher from San Luis Obispo from an elementary school. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, if I had a first grader, I'd put him in your classroom, whether it was in person or remote. I'd put him in this remote classroom because she was just doing a fantastic job with the kids. They were engaged. She was lucky she had smaller classes. So I think you're going to see parents being a little bit more selective and looking at the specific needs of their child and seeing what's best for them. And it's not going to be the automatic default where I'm going to drive my kid to this school. Yeah, he'll be at school till 3 o'clock. It may not be what he wants, but it's convenient for everybody. And I think you're going to see a little bit more of the parents taking the individual needs of each of these kids into consideration. And you might see, like we saw in some families with 3 or 4 kids, a couple of kids going in person. One of their kids was staying remote and doing that because they seemed to perform better and it was doing better for them. So I think you're seeing a little bit of that as well. And it's not just that let's default to go to school, drop them off, the bus picks them up, drops them off at 3, and the kids aren't happy. I think now they're trying to do a little bit more of what's best for the kid. Let me make sure the kid's happy in terms of where they're learning. And if it means it's at home and we got to make arrangements around that, then we'll try and do that.
I'm really glad you said all that, because there's been a lot of superintendents and mid-tier management, a lot of districts that we've talked to, that you bring up the idea of the change teacher role. And somebody will always pipe up and say, oh, you have to have teachers. It's like their world pivots on the human. Never said that you don't need teachers, right? But you need to look at what is the exact perfection of the use of a teacher. And the choice world, like you're saying, there's one first grade teacher that was like marvelous in a million ways, right? Okay, I would like a menu that lets me pick that, right? And then I got all these other things I gotta get on the menu, like when you're ordering, it's like you gotta get the drink and the fries. Okay, what about my history and my map and my other thing? Like in some of them, I don't want a human. I just want to do the online and only intersect when needed. So if we go all the way to sort of the nuclear option of the mutation and where it's really going, it doesn't get rid of human intersection and true teaching, but it definitely goes in the direction of a full smorgasbord of choice. And that, what I'm afraid of is that some of the public institutions are going to try to stick to their guns. And their teachers are just waiting to be grateful to be back and they can toss out the technology again. Are you kind of hearing the same thing?
Yes, but very reluctantly. I think one of the things, and I just saw a couple of it the other day, it was not in our county, it was in another county. You've even got some high schools giving kids a hybrid option where maybe they take, and this had to do, I think, more so with the teacher that was teaching it than anything else. But you had kids at this one district that were taking English, math, and social studies, let's say, in person, but we're doing science and a theater arts or something online. So you've got the hybrid within the school in terms of, and one of them was doing it because they were in sports and it was they wanted a certain teacher. And so the school, much to their to compliment them, said, okay, yeah, we're going to allow that. So there are some that are doing some things differently and trying to accommodate the kids. And I think we're always so big on student voice and student choice. And I think right now it's time for some of these schools and districts to kind of put their money where their mouth is. And if they're that big in school and student voice and student choice, well, then start giving them some opportunities to do some things a little bit differently. Because, like I said before, and I'll say it 1,000 times, some of the stuff that we're doing now is not working, and we've got to change the way we approach some of these things if we're going to do what's best for the kids. Because if it's not working for the kids, then I don't see how you keep on doing it the same way.
Yeah. So I think what I want to do with you next is I want to ask your critique of the ideas that have come out from the research. So I'm showing the screen again. What is hybrid logistics? So this is the foundation of the Learning Council's hybrid logistics project. is that there needs to be put in the market an essential interchange ecosystem, which we're doing a demo build in the No Story social media site, right? Where I think you're familiar with it. To automate pacing guides. This is a stepping stone that's really hard for schools. We did a review. The average school district does PDF pacing guide documents or spreadsheets disassociated from any other system. So as a teacher, if you're looking at your pacing guide documents, which you download from some remote folder from some administrator somewhere, if you look at that, then you have to look at your learning management system, then you got to look at your schedule. Okay, so you're triangulating information to then, in some other methodology or system, build your lesson plan. Oftentimes you're flying by the seat of your pants because there's some pacing guide change. So the algorithmic inference between the mandates on pacing guide, like what standard to teach when, the learning management system, and the calendar, nothing exists to fill this algorithmic inference hole, right? So just intellectually, what are your thoughts on that having some sort of meaningful technological answer?
I like that better than the system that's out there right now, which is the same pacing guide for every single kid, every single student, every single class, and things like that, which we know does not work. I think I like that because I'd like to see more of what we had at one of the charter schools that I opened, which was called an ILP, an individualized learning plan. So much like you have one for special education students, we created one for every single student in the school, and it was different. So I think something like what you're talking about with the hybrid logistics, something like that would fit much better with what's going on with kids right now, especially with kids all over the map in terms of where they are from a knowledge standpoint. I still think that, and for the last couple of schools that I ran, they were STEAM charter schools. They were schools that were built on a PBL platform, so it was all project-based learning. Now, one of the schools, it took us a little while to get there. The other one, we walked into a PBL. And if you're doing something like that, you almost don't even need a pacing guide because it's going to be up to the kids to pace themselves, and the level of the student's going to dictate where they go with the project anyway. And I think there's so many schools now that are going to a PBL model, and the PBL almost has the hybrid logistics built into it because the kids that are up higher on the ladder are going to naturally put that into their project, and they're going to cover it, and they're going to be more in terms of the content standards. The kids that are a little bit lower are going to go in at a slower rate, and they're not going to have so much. So that kind of takes care of all that pacing guide for you because they're going to put into their project what they know, understand, and can verbalize in terms of a presentation, whether it be written or oral. So while I do like that, I think if a lot of these schools would go to that kind of a project-based learning model, I think that kind of takes care of a lot of that, and it puts the hybrid logistics almost built into the projects.
Yeah, I agree with that. So yeah, I learned something from what you just talked about, and that is, in my mind, most of the pacing guide work across all of America is an administrator that maybe is the language learner or science learner lead in the academic curriculum side up in the district. They look over here at the state standards, and it's sixth grade, and they grab the standards, maybe 2 or 3 of them, and glob them into week 1 learning. So they plot that on the pacing guide calendar and say week 1, 3 standards. Week 2 is only 1 standard. Week 3, 4, 5 is 6 standards globbed together in a nebulous 3-week period, and so forth, right?
And sometimes, Leilani, there was no connection to any of those standards. Sometimes you'd have 5 or 6 standards put together, and there was absolutely no connection. Teachers made no connection for the students to see how they were related in any way, shape, or form. So at least when you do the project-based learning, you're going to try and take the standards, or you're going to try and take the performance expectations that are interconnected the way they should be. So kids see, when I learn math, it's not just math, but it's math connected to science which might be connected to social studies. When I learn English language arts, it might be English language arts connected to science, connected to physical education or something like that. Just to do the standards in that kind of a format and a pacing plan with no connection, and the kids don't see any form of interrelationship, I don't think it does them any good, because now they don't see how everything's connected.
You're right. You're touching on something really, really important. So in my mind, what was being done is the teacher looked at these sort of little naked standards, or like 2 sentences, right? Like thou shalt learn fraction, 6th grade, right?
Yeah.
And they looked at them, and then they had an ingenious moment of being like you are, a lot of your teachers that you've talked about, and said, I will use this idea, PBL, to cause that, which is the standard over here, this little thing that's floating over here, right? Rather than just be very, this, right? Like just, right? Because yeah, like standards are, in my mind, being a coder, they're little coder development lines. They're supposed to tell the front end what to do, right? In general. And then the front end is the HTML code that's glorious and pretty, and it does a million things, right? So these little codes are like, sort of things, right? But you're right. We've had missing, since academic codes became popular, which was before the pandemic, a complete training to cause the imagination and the ingenuity of the teachers to absorb those and mutate those into, the things that. What was your thought on that?
Well, I really like the way that the science, they call them standards, but they're really what's expected of the students. They're called performance expectations, and it's defined as, this is what at the end of this unit the student is expected to be able to know, do, and perform. And then the key is, how do you demonstrate through performance? And that performance, they leave it wide open. It's no more, you have to memorize this, you have to do that. It's the student will be able to demonstrate knowledge of those standards through a performance. The performance can be oral, it can be written, it can be a video, it can be a PowerPoint, whatever is most comfortable for the kids. Because I think we're finally getting to the point where we're acknowledging, we don't care how you as a student demonstrate your knowledge of that content, as long as you can demonstrate to us as a teacher for an assessment that you not only know it, not only understand it, but I think most importantly for me, and what was most important in my classroom, is you can apply it. And for me, it was always, how do you take what you learn in my classroom and show me outside of the walls of my classroom that you can apply what you've learned? And it could be writing a letter to a business for something, for English language arts. It could be going to the store and making sure they don't kind of give you the shaft and charge you $5 more than you're supposed to. And for me, and it was for science, it was always, all right, you see an airplane flying, what does that have to do with what we just learned about draft and friction and all that kind of stuff? And to me, I would sit there, and we've been doing some work with the person, Myron Dweck, and he's out of Canada, and he's got some really different, unique takes on grading and everything. And he said he had a student that missed the test and wanted to make up the test. And he was driving by, now he's in Canada, he was driving by a hardware store. He saw the student's car. He went in, the student was stocking shelves, and he said, you got 20 minutes, here's your test. And he started asking, and the kid was like, oh, and he started pulling stuff off the shelf and making some model representations and this and that. And Myron said it was phenomenal. The kid passed the test, and everything was done. And I think more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, demonstrate that you know it. Let's go outside. Show me something.
Yeah. And I'm really a huge proponent of that whole thing. And, we have this new EduJedi instructional design model that was birthed. It's in the dictionary. And I just had an event the other day where we talked extensively about what we call the discovery design model, which is exactly what you're talking about. It's just called something else. But, when you really think about it, you have the open world and you have the open internet now. There's no reason why we're not doing more Socratic questioning. Here's a general idea that you're supposed to learn this. And even let them come up with their own thesis and then go through thesis proofing and then finally present their finished thesis, right? Like, we don't even have to ask the question. We can just give them, you're supposed to go this, right? And then they have like this whole thing that they teach themselves that. In high school, that seems perfectly reasonable.
But it's not just in a high school, Leilani. It can be, I mean, I taught for years adjunct at the university level at 3 or 4 different universities. And I maintain then, and I still maintain now, I can tell a lot more by the questions you're asking than by you answering my questions. And I think the questions that kids ask show a lot more thought. It shows more of their understanding or lack thereof when they ask a question in a certain way. And I think that's where science and NGSS got it right, because one of their big keys of this science and engineering practice is the kids asking questions and training kids and working with kids to be able to search for and ask questions and ask them the right way. And then what do you do with those answers once you get them? You practically apply them. Which is much better than me just asking you a question and you giving me an answer, whether it's a knowledgeable one or not, or it could be an answer that's just spit back into another format. And yes, you got the answer correct, but do you really know and understand it? And can you apply it?
Yeah. And miraculously, this kind of thing that you're having, I am hearing in a lot of other places. People are enamored of this whole ideology of more PBL, more, sort of Socratic thing. And I think it's a fantastic gift, if the pandemic could be as awful as it has been, for having this conversation. And indeed, like you said before, to witness that some students have learned better this way. I think, wow, is this a learning moment for all of education? We're in a huge moment on so many dimensional levels. But what you just talked about, I am hearing in other places as we crisscross the country with virtual events, and now we're going to be physically in Dallas and Atlanta next week. It's amazing, and I hope that it goes somewhere. Don't you?
And you know where I'm hearing it most importantly of all, Leilani, is in teacher education programs and teacher preparation programs. They're starting to see, and I'm starting to hear some of that conversation in terms of, look at, we're losing so many teachers in the profession. What's going on? And we're losing them early within the first 3 to 5 years. And maybe we've got to take a look at how we're preparing them. And some of these programs, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but let's just say some of them, in my opinion, aren't preparing them and aren't preparing some of these kids to go into some of these tough areas that they're going into to teach, and preparing them to deal with the kids and what they have to do. And when you go into a classroom and you're dealing at a 10th grade class with a kid that's reading at a 3rd or 4th grade level, what do? Well, you don't do what I saw when I was working with one of the districts. You don't just pile the books on top of the counter and leave them there literally from day one of the start of school till the last day of school. You've got to figure out different ways. There's literacy in different ways, and may not be reading. It may be looking at pictures. They're changing a lot of the literacy standards here in California. They're going to have to be literate in looking at YouTube videos and taking apart data and looking at the data. So there's a lot of different things that they can do that I think they're realizing, okay, if we're going to deal with kids at a literacy level that are well below where they should be, what else can we do and how else can we prepare them? Because the whole thing, again, is preparing them for college or career. And if some of these kids aren't going to go to college, then we need to start doing something that will prepare them for a career so they can be successful and earn enough money to make a decent living.
Yeah, you said a lot there. But totally agree with you. There's drivers here, like a lot of new drivers here. And I almost want to make a list now based on everything that you've said and start bringing it up with a lot more people, because like I said, I think the reason we're having the digital transition discussion is we are, as a nation, in transition. Things are changing. What is the list of all those things? And you just mentioned a couple of really good ones. As we get into this next conversation, just before I leave you, I want to ask you one other thing. Did you also see growth in more students coming in that are foreign language entirely?
That's a real tough one, because I think if there's two populations that I think the pandemic really did catch people off guard and ill prepared for, I think one was your English language learners, of which, here in California, it's almost getting to the point where they do outweigh the English language native speakers in terms of that one. And then I think your special ed population, I think those two populations are two that this was really caught everybody off guard. And it was, okay, how do we deal with this in terms of, they know how to deal with it, but how do they deal with it without taking them out of the general population, which is what they want to do. They want them mainstreamed in with the general population. And we don't want them to miss out on the English, the math, the science, the social studies. And how do we take them away from that? Or how do we leave them in that while then taking them away to deal with the language acquisition and things like that? And I know some of the things that I'm working on from a personal standpoint here in our county, as a huge one, is using science as a lever for literacy. And I actually picked that up for some people up in Northern California at the Monterey County office that were using science as a lever for literacy. And we're using that for a couple of things down here in Southern California in terms of, okay, so let's work on science, but at the same time, we can work on literacy, and where you can work on their literacy skills, and whether it's depicting graphs or whether it's looking at a picture, whether it's watching a YouTube video, whatever it may be, there's different types of literacy, and the kids are going to need to be able to get into and decipher all of those different types. So again, I think it goes back to your initial question and conversation, is how do we do things differently? And I think there's a lot of different ways to do that.
Well, I love everything that you just said. I wish I had kept you into this next half hour, but I've kept you for like almost an hour now. It feels like, is it an hour? Like, wow. Wonderful conversation with you, Scott. I mean, I think I could talk to you for 8 more hours.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure to work with you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. You're going to get quoted probably all over our newsletters, and all that other stuff. We'll be putting this out. But thank you for being with us today very much.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being with us.